It's my pleasure to declare the meeting open and welcome all in attendance. I would like to make people aware that this Audit and Risk Committee meeting is being live streamed and recorded in accordance with the City's live streaming and recording council meetings policy. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the City recording and live streaming of their image and or their voice. I'd now like to welcome Councillor Barry Winmar to present the Welcome to Country.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll begin by acknowledging my elders past and present, and we are conducting this meeting on Noongar Boodja. Ngalak yening kulang kurang ngalak noich nija Noongar Boodja. Noongar mo jerpan yening nija ngalak kwabadak Noongar Boodja kurlang. From the beginning of time to the end, this is Noongar country. Noongar people have been graceful keepers of our nation for many, many years. Jinin encouraging jerpan nija wer Noongar Boodja ngala maya border. Look, listen, understand, and embrace all the elements of Noongar country, because it is forever our home. Kai wanju ngan ko jerpan nija Noongar Boodja dajli wangan in Noongar Boodja. Hello and welcome. My heart is happy as we are gathered on Noongar country and meeting on Noongar country tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here, and before commencing the proceedings, I would like to acknowledge that we come together tonight on the traditional land of the Noongar people, and we pay our respects to the elders, past and present. Moving to item 3, are there any apologies or leave of absences to report? None? I understand there is no public question time agendas. Is that confirmed? Thank you. And there are no petitions, presentations and deputations. Are there any declarations of interest by members or city officers that have not otherwise been declared that relate to this agenda this evening? No declarations. Moving to item 7, the confirmation of the minutes for the meeting held on the 19th of June 2023. Do I have a mover of the minutes? Thank you, Mayor Adams. Seconder? Thank you very much, Councillor Rouse. All those in favour? And nil against. The minutes are carried. Moving to item 8, the business continuity framework. Now, this needs to be handled in 2 parts because there is a confidential attachment that we will need to move behind closed doors. So before we do so, is there any general introduction that management would like to make to this item?
Through the Chair, the RISWES were appointed to conduct a review of the City's business continuity documentation, which date back to 2015. So following RISWES meeting with exec and all business units across the City, they've come up with 3 draft documents which are presented to the committee for their review and comment tonight. These are draft comments, they're yet to be fully finalised, but they're presented for the committee's review and comment. Those 3 documents are the Business Continuity Framework, which is the overarching document which sets out how they tie together. There's the Continuity Plan, which sets the priority of each of the core functions of the City here so that we can prioritise our resources and long-term recovery in the event of a prolonged disruption. And the 3rd document is the Crisis Management Plan. This is the more comprehensive of the documents. This sets out the guidelines for assessing and responding to events that threaten to disrupt services, allocation of and mobilisation of resources, communication with the public and with staff, managing public relations, and those more in-depth matters such as that.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on this item before we go behind closed doors to discuss the attachments? I do have one question. I note in the resolution and in the paperwork that we do identify that These are live working documents and will receive regular minor updates on an as required basis. My question is, do we have the rigour around ensuring these major documents are updated on a regular basis? Because there was some time between the last update.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So this is mainly in relation to how we're going to test the business continuity plans. So the reason why we're sort of keeping them live at this stage is that we are looking to do some desktop exercising and then some further exercising around our business impacts. Once we've done that, then the frameworks and the plans will be updated again. And then it'll be an ongoing process following exercises and reviews that they'll be updated. I think the issue it's been getting from where we had very old plans that were outdated to this stage.
Thank you. Now, moving behind closed doors, could I move that from the chair in order to support the discussion of the confidential attachments? Do I have a seconder? Thank you very much, Councillor Winmar. All those in favour? That's carried with nil against. Could we please now For the record, we have just had a discussion around the confidential attachments A, B and C relating to the Business Continuity Framework Plan and Crisis Management Plan. We have a resolution. Do I have a mover? Thank you very much. Councillor Rouse, a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Winmar. Is there no further discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Nil against, the motion's carried. Just could I comment that it's really excellent to see this piece of work being done. It's such an important risk management strategy, and I'm keen that we do have the annual report against it and that it is kept up to date. So thank you very much to the CEO and staff. We move now to 8.2, the Risk Management Activity Report. Would management care to introduce this item?
Through the chair, there's currently 120 risks across the city captured within our risk registers. So that's comprised of 12 strategic and 108 operational. So there's a very large amount of risk. Training provided to my team is really focused on making sure that those risks are of good quality, that we're capturing what we need to capture, and that we're reviewing them within appropriate timeframes. In terms of the risks that are presented to this committee, there's no operational risks presented on the basis that there's no operational risks marked as high or extreme residual. In relation to the strategic risks, there's no material change since the previous meeting other than updated review dates and comments. No material changes to the strategic risks.
Thank you. Any questions or comments regarding this item? Mr. Arnold?
This observation, I think, as we've sort of gone over the last number of Audit Risk Committee meetings, the reporting has gotten better and better, and the information, you can see the constant updates both from an action perspective as well as a risk perspective. So sort of well done in terms of that evolution and maturity. Just wanted to refer to page 30, just as an example of a risk. It is SR23. And one observation, I don't know if we've discussed it sort of previously, is in terms of the next review dates have been a significant number of years out. There's a number of risks which are the next review date within the system is in a few years' time, and in this instance is May 2026. I acknowledge that the last review date has been sort of recently sort of completed, but there's a number of sort of risks which are up for review in 2 to 3 years' time, and I think that's in terms of risks as a prioritisation exercise, but risks really need to be reviewed at least on an annual basis. And whilst it may be done, I guess it's using the tools of the system to make sure that the next review date is when it's anticipated to be done. And I think 3 years' time, as an example, is probably too much.
Through you, Madam Chair. That's actually it's a good pickup. That's actually an error. So there's a couple of things which are occurring. So in all the KPIs that have gone out to the executive leadership team and then down to managers. So there's a KPI around financial and risk management. So there's a requirement for them to manage and review their risks on a monthly basis. And then this would then flow through to this. So we would expect these to be at least no more than annually, but they should be reviewed at least monthly, particularly the strategic ones and any ones which are of a high or an extreme.
Thank you. No further questions from me.
Through the chair, if I could clarify, the control actions for that particular risk are reviewed far more regularly. So you can see the controls developer contribution payment audit, that next review date was 31st of December this year. Minimise use of multiple external consultants where possible. That next review date is 24th of May 2024. The timeframe of 2026 for the review of the whole risk was on the basis that Rawlinson's consultants were appointed on a 3-year contract. So it was assessed by the director that there wouldn't be a risk for the next 3 years. So we'll review the whole risk in its entirety in 3 years, but the actions, as I mentioned, are reviewed on a much more regular basis, just to clarify that particular risk.
Great, thank you. I guess, through the chair, in terms of that sort of next communication, whilst the controls are sort of reviewed, doing it hand in hand with the risk as well, because once those controls are reviewed, it impacts the overarching sort of risk. But having that sort of ongoing communication with the risk owners, which is a evolution process as well, because risk owners sort of change, the risk itself change, so it's just part of that active process. And there's maybe one other sort of point which could be included as part of that ongoing sort of education. Just as an example, on page 27, which is SR 18, Community Engagement Practice, which is a medium rate of risk. I think when we have sort of risks, that have a sort of medium, sort of higher rating, it's making sure that we have sort of risk actions which are sort of contributing to reducing that. I think having those sort of actions as completed at the bottom there is sort of useful, but there still are sort of controls in there which are partially effective. So I'd expect to see some sort of control actions to try and address that as well. And again, it's to review it sort of there's a large body of work there. I guess it's just those sort of key pointers which will constantly sort of improve the risk profile. So it's obviously a sort of a job sort of well done, but just making sure that those sort of key messages are reiterated. No further questions from me.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have a question relating to schools within the city, so that I've observed that we've appointed external consultants to undertake this review, and it's for a period of 3 years. And my question relates to the transference of knowledge and skills to the city with respect to the processes and the insights that they bring to this exercise.
So you're referring to the DCP one?
Yes.
Yeah.
We work, through the chair, we work very closely with the consultant. So the reason we gave them 3 years is that it's not, well, the 3 years is for them to review the DCP cost estimate every year over 3 years, and we'll see how they perform and how it goes. And if the performance is not up to scale, we'll replace them. But we also do have a skill. We're learning from them, but we have a skill to perform the work. It's just that the task is immense. It covers a lot of things. So we need to manage them as we're completing the works. So it's not that we don't have a skill, we do have a skill. But they understand the market better than us, the external market, because the cost estimates depend on the external market. So they understand the market better than us. But in terms of the calculation, all that thing, we do have a skill. We can do that.
So really using them selectively where they have that market-based information and expertise that we don't as a client.
Yes.
Okay.
And then we review every the work that they've done to confirm that that is compliant with best practice and to our satisfaction.
Thank you. So returning to the recommendation. The recommendation is that we note and provide comment where appropriate regarding the organisational risk register. I'm happy to move that officer recommendation from the chair. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Fesey. Could I have a Show of hands for all those in favour. Thank you. Nil against. The motion's carried. Just moving to the next item, please. The audit action log progress report, item 8.3. Take this paper as read. Would management like to make any opening remarks?
Through the chair, this is a report that's presented to each meeting of this committee. It tracks all outstanding audit actions for review by this committee. Of note in this particular report is the inclusion of the findings from the recent internal audit of the building services team by Paxson. Although you'll note that they made 3 recommendations, given the significant delay between when they conducted the investigation and when they produced the final report. The city was already doing a number of actions to improve our pool inspection practices. So 2 of the actions have been marked as completed by the officers as being something that we've adequately addressed. Those related to the timings of pool inspections, we're now, relatively up to date. The 3rd finding related to our IT practices, the fact that our current IT system couldn't actually capture the days overdue that the pool inspection was done, and simple matters like that. So this is something that's going to be worked on by the relevant manager into the future. There are a number of audits that have been undertaken here at the city, but the reports haven't been finalised, so those will be presented to the next meeting of this committee. There was a Regulation 5 financial audit, there was an interim financial audit by RSM, a General Controls IT audit, and an internal audit of community engagement that's currently being completed. So they'll be presented to future meetings of this committee. I will note for this committee that the city have undertaken they've undertaken a investigation into an appropriate auditor to complete the upcoming Regulation 17 review. Australian Auditors was selected as the preferred candidate to do that investigation, heavily based on price, but there was a positive feedback obtained from Shire of Narrogin and City of Mandurah, who had both used that service successfully in the past. So they'll be conducting the upcoming Regulation 17 review for the city. They'll also be appointed for 12 months, a very short time frame, to continue on from Paxson, undertaking the city's internal auditing, and we'll see the quality of the service that we provide by them.
Thank you. So noting that there are 3 audits for the next audit committee meeting, that will require some time to review those, so thank you. Moving on to the audit log, there's a number that have been completed and a number that are still in progress. Are there any questions relating to those outstanding or completed audits? Mr. Arnold?
Thanks, through the chair. There's a reference to the planning and building audits which have been closed out. Can I confirm that on page 41, the first audit action on the log has been closed out?
Through the chair, that's correct. That action has been marked as completed by the relevant manager.
Okay. I suppose through the chair, one of the recommendations is to implement a process of regular monitoring and spot checks. I think to close it out is premature. There's an exercise in terms of reviewing things in the past. I think typically an audit action that involves implementing a process of ongoing monitoring would need to actually sort of prove that that process is happening on a regular basis. Whether that's sort of 6 months or 12 months, I think that would be prudent. So I think, through the chair, from my perspective, I believe that this audit action is a bit preemptive to close out. But I'm just, I suppose, seeking any additional sort of context around that sort of close out that I may not be aware of.
Through the chair, the manager has put in place a formal 6-month review process. So we undertook the completion of the review for the last financial year in June. So the next formal process will be in December. However, it's undertaken on a monthly basis, the actual reviews, because we have Royal Life Saving WA as our contractor. So every month we review the work that that particular company is contracted to complete for the city as part of the statutory checks. So they're every 4-year checks, and I can confidently say at the end of September they are ahead of schedule and almost completed their 2023 requirement for swimming pools.
Thank you. I guess, yeah, through the chair, from my perspective, I'd like to see, I suppose, this audit action to have a number of cycles in terms of that monitoring process to demonstrate that's still working prior to close out. I think particularly given it's a higher rated issue, there's significant reputational and compliance risks associated with this, and it sounds like a body of work has been done. We understand where the process deficiencies are, but I think in terms of prudence, just to really make sure that monitoring is occurring prior to closing out might be a prudent approach.
Thank you for that suggestion. Are there any further comments? If everyone's in agreement, thank you. Do you have any further questions, Mr. Arnold?
Yes, I do. Just want to refer to page 50, please. It's in relation to the procurement monitoring issue. So it's really around purchase order being raised after invoice. So I think it might be the next one. So it's action 6.2, I think. So it's on page, I believe the agenda papers, page 49 was mine, sorry. Yes. So yeah, sort of noting that this issue can be closed, monitoring is now sort of part of the process. I think in terms of the sort of purchase orders and that sort of supporting process, I have seen this type of activity quite a standard item on other local government's audit and risk committees in terms of that sort of the review to make sure we have compliance with our contracting procurement system. And I guess it's just a suggestion or consideration through the chair whether or not there's a periodic process just to make sure that the current sort of system is really, I suppose, covering off this type of process to make sure that essentially we're not raising purchase orders after invoicing. I think there's a consideration in terms of sort of effort, but yeah, that's something which is sort of done, I suppose, to cover this off, because a key effect of this sort of process is in relation to audit opinions. There's a few organisations that have been given unqualified opinions because of this. So I think our system design is going to give us a bit of comfort, but it's just maybe just something to round out and could form part of a monitoring process for this committee, because I'm sure from a organisation perspective it's sort of been covered. So I guess it's just a consideration through the chair.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Response, please.
Yeah, just further to that through the chair. So Tech 1 does provide greater visibility and monitoring over purchase orders which are raised after the fact, after invoices have been received. There's also reporting which goes out to all the managers and directors and staff which are then responsible for the raising of the purchase orders, which goes out on a monthly basis. And then they have to report back with reasons as to why that's occurred. And we've been tracking the numbers of purchase orders, which is on the decline.
Thank you. And will the new system also guard against the practice of invoice splitting? Are there checks and balances there?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's a definite no-no.
Thank you. Any further questions, Mr. Arnold?
Yeah, apologies, I'm asking a fair few questions. So, One question, it's maybe a structural sort of component in terms of the internal audit section is typically you would see progress against the internal audit plan as part of an audit risk committee, and the actions are a key component of it. So maybe through the chair is a consideration of the update against the strategic internal audit plan. So that could form part of the list of the internal audits when it's currently planned, if it has been completed. What that does is gives us visibility to make sure that the plan that we are committed to is sort of being completed. And one of the reasons that was sort of visible for this was this recent audit was the planning and buildings audit, which was originally scheduled in 21-22. So if it's being sort of completed now, there's a timing sort of issue. So it'd be good to understand as a committee maybe the reasons for why that sort of prioritisation has changed or that timing has changed. So again, maybe as consideration is in terms of future audit and risk committees that we have just that strategic audit plan, just with a summary of the sort of progress, because that's something that we can, I suppose, discuss and provide input in terms of that prioritisation as well. So, so two prongs. There's a consideration in terms of the structure, but then a specific question around the planning and building audit. Was that the audit that was originally scheduled for 21-22?
Oh.
Through the chair, the internal audit plan is included in the report that's presented to the committee. I can say that we are slightly behind at this point in time, partially because we were unable to recruit internal auditor staff member. So following failed recruitment process, we've decided to appoint Australian auditors, as I've mentioned. So they'll be continuing the plan, but there was a slight delay. In terms of the building audit, initially we asked for a delay over the Christmas period, just given resourcing issues. So that pushed it into the new year, and then unfortunately it did take significantly longer than expected to finalise that report from Paxson, which unfortunately, was delayed.
Great, thank you. And just one follow-up query. In terms of the appointing of the new auditor, was that to finish off the current strategic internal audit plan, or was there a sort of rebaselining and a reprioritisation that sort of formed part of that new engagement?
Through the chair, so they'll be appointed for a 12-month period. It's like a trial period, essentially. So we're not appointing them for a long-term period where we suffer further delays. They're expected to follow on the plan from Paxson and continue it from there. There hasn't been a realigning at this stage, I can say. So they'll be following the plan as it's currently scheduled, although delayed.
Great, thank you. I suppose just a consideration, if you're still going through that process, whilst it's a 3-year plan, it's still an opportunity to right-size it, and that's something that the Audit and Risk Committee can also provide input on, because having a 3-year plan it works really well, but it doesn't have to be a constraint if there's higher risk areas or things that sort of come up. So I guess it's just a consideration through the chair is that might be a good opportunity to get the input of the auditors also, is to get their lens around making sure that it covers off some of those key risk areas. So just a consideration as you go through that process.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Fresh pair of eyes and look at the plan. I noticed we have 80 hours for everything, so there might be some nuancing that we can achieve within that budget that allows us to do deeper, broader or more audits. So are there any further questions from the remainder of the committee on the audit log and subject to the suggestions from Mr. Arnold, the closing out or any of the outstanding items? If not, I'd like to move to the Paxson report on page 61, I think. So my question, if I may go first, is in reading this report, there's a legislative requirement. It's very much a process management issue. The actual work, I understand, is outsourced to the Royal Life Saving Association. In reading the report, appears as if this process has been out of control, and I'm trying to understand why that has occurred. Is it a resourcing issue? You know, what's the root cause of where we got to in this piece of work?
Through the chair, it's fair to say at the time that the audit was undertaken, there was probably a number of elements. Firstly, a system issue. So our current authority system was not generating accurate information regarding pool data and hadn't been updated for some time. And as a result, there were manual Excel spreadsheets being used to monitor the pool database. So you had a manual process working alongside the actual authority process and review. At the time, we appointed a new manager, so that was under the control of the previous manager. The new manager came on board late last year, and that was the first priority task that he was charged with, to review and get a an accurate understanding of the pools within the city, the number of pools, the number that have been inspected, the number that are compliant, etc. And as a result, at the time that the audit was being undertaken was at the time when the manager was undertaking that review. So it would be fair to say that before that review was undertaken and the audit was undertaken, we had a number of different competing data sources that we were working from, and then we're trying to manage the consultants around that as well. So there were discrepancies in the information that was being used to inform the management of the pools. That being said, over the last 6 months, that's been the priority of the Manager Building Services, to review the data on the basis of all sources and provide a master spreadsheet. The issue that we have, as you're fully aware, because it's an item on the agenda, is that we're transitioning our corporate business system, so we cannot invest any more in authority, and authority is not working for that register at the moment. We can't produce the reports that we need to manage this risk, so we have to do it as a separate process. So we are working outside of the system and have set up this master database to support the team in the interim until phase 2, which the building team is part of, is complete, which is not long now. It'll be more towards the end of next year, as we understand it. So we're now confident, as per the report, that there were only 4 pools that were outstanding in terms of not being signed off. However, the risk to the city and to the owners has been mitigated because the inspections have been carried out, and now we are ahead of schedule with the Royal Life Saving contract.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that response. So we were aware of this before we did the audit. Okay, thank you. Because there could be tragic outcomes of the breakdown of this process. So really encouraged to see and to hear that we're now ahead of it. Other questions or comments, please?
Through the chair, just 2 follow-up questions. In the audit, it referenced 4 exceptions out of 30 during the audit testing. I think the reference was, in terms of the comprehensive review, that there was sort of 4 issues across the population. Were they the same 4 that the audit sort of picked up, or is that the result of all the additional reviews and processes that have been completed?
Yeah, it's different 4, yeah. So the 4 initially identified were part of, I think, the auditor's spot check process, whereas the 4 that ended up on the inspection list, but not yet finalised at the end of June 2023, were as a result of the full-scale review.
Through the chair, as a follow-up, just to get an idea of sort of scale. So in terms of the audit, the 4 out of 30 identified, sort of various, sort of issues within from initial observations in terms of the follow-up process through to the full compliance. On your sort of full review, can you give me, I suppose, an idea of the issues that were noted in the audit, how that, through your review, how that ended up across the sort of population? Was it a similar sort of percentage gap in terms of that issue that was originally noted?
Through the chair, I can't really comment on the percentage gap and how that 4 out of 30 would apply to the full review, because it really, the deep dive that the team went through was essentially going through every pool in the city on our register and making sure that the different data sets were compliant. So I can't give you a percentage as to how much over that 6-month period in the review was consistent with that 4 out of 30 figure.
I guess just in terms of a reader of, this is probably the way the internal audit report has been sort of created. It's referencing four of the 30 samples that were selected had various sort of issues. So I think as a sort of reader, trying to gauge the whether there's a minor process sort of issues or significant ones, just sort of trying to work out, because I think the natural follow-up action of reviewing the whole population to see, is it a systemic issue, was it a sample that just picked out sort of certain few? So I guess it's just trying to sort of gauge a sort of feeling around, in terms of the audit sort of techniques, was that representative of the underlying issues, and then therefore you sort of changed it, or is it you just miraculously covered off on the sort of a small sample that had the issues? So I'm just, I suppose, trying to gauge, in between what the audit report says and that follow-up.
Yeah. Through you, Madam Chair, I think there's probably a bit of confusion. So the auditors, when they did their spot check, identified the 30. As Maria has said, the manager, getting the new manager on board, went through, reviewed the systems and processes as to how it was done, has created a database to then be able to manage it, and then a full review of the city's swimming pools against that and against authority was then undertaken. And then as a result of that full review, only 4 have been identified because they had gone through and then had rectified the ones that were done. So there's 2 distinct. There's the ones that the auditor's done, and then following a full review, which was taking place at the same time. And as Russell has said, there was a significant delay between when the audit was undertaken and the report was received to the work that was done. So the 4 are part of the 30, but there is not a systemic problem in terms of errors being done. It's been addressed now.
Great, thank you. One reference in the audit report was around the risks relating to pools being rated from a low residual perspective. I think the reference was we knew some of these issues were existing. I guess my question is, if we knew that there's some issues in terms of sort of reporting and the ability to manage these risks, why the risks were rated from a low residual sort of perspective? I think it's that page 61. So the paragraph above 2.1, good practice. I think the sort of last sentence refers to these sort of risks being generally related as a low residual risk. So I think what the audit
In
sort of
relation to management information.
I think the audit reflection is that the risk register essentially be updated and to be reworked following the result of this internal audit, which is, I suppose, general practice. I think it's noting here that those risks relating to sort of pools were generally of that low residual risk rating. I suppose my question is, if we knew that there was a few sort of issues in terms of the systems, sort of et cetera, typically that would form part of the risk management reporting and self-reflection. So I suppose just seeking clarification
Yeah,
around that.
through you, Madam Chair, once again, that comment is, it's at a point in time when they did the audit. So what's occurred since then is a lot of changes to the processes in terms of how the pools are managed. Full review was then done. So based upon that review and the processes that have been put in place, the 4 that have been identified, there's a higher degree of confidence in terms of the management, the reporting and the understanding of outstanding pools. So the risk would have been updated, but it still would not be at the level which would then require reporting through to the council.
Great. So through the chair, just to confirm, as a result of this sort of internal audit, you've reflected the
Yes,
risk, and that's been sort of updated
Yeah.
and reflected as part of the process. Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? If not, we'll return to the resolution where we're being asked to note the attachment and the planning and building internal audit by Paxson Group. Have a mover? Thank you. Mayor, seconded. Councillor Winmar. All those in favour? Nil against. Carried. Item 8.4, the Work Health and Safety Statistical Report. Are there any opening remarks by management?
Through you, Madam Chair. As my manager HR is away, I've been tasked with giving an update. So work health and safety is progressing quite well in terms of the work health and safety committees and their focus around the strategic plan. We also have done quite a lot of training with staff around the work health and safety, as well as the implementation of MyOsh and the further development from that. And as more information goes into that, the reporting will be able to get better. At this point, the report is focused around the lost time injuries. One lost time injury as an employee got sand in their eye and then had to have the rest of the shift off, but then everything was fine following that. There's been 2 medical ones with a cat bite and a dog bite, both to rangers that required tetanus shots. We've also changed the process in terms of the inoculations that the rangers now get. So before they were having to go off and get their Hep B, C's boosters. Now all of them will get that upon starting, and then they go on to a process for updates around that. 2 first aids, minor slips, trips and falls from the aquatic, and a staff member washing dishes accidentally bumped the hot water. But pleased to report, no electrocutions from fences.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. I noted on page 76 the inclusion of inappropriate behaviour, violence and abuse.
Yes, I've got a comment down here.
Thank you.
Well picked up, Madam Chair. That was a report only. That was inappropriate behaviour, which was the interactions were reported to the police. Staff were not placed in danger or verbally abused, and they were assessed by supervisors, and there was also no EAP required.
So was that between a member of the
It was
community and
members of the public. Yeah.
members of the public? Okay, thank you. Open to questions?
Just going to ask, sorry, you may have just mentioned it, the Office of the CEO, 2 incidences, are they from internal or external, or are you able to elaborate, because I wouldn't have at all?
Through you, Madam Chair, yeah, very dangerous working in the Office of the CEO.
Well, I didn't want to say that.
Yeah, no, they were staff members washing dishes in the lunchroom and accidentally bumped the hot water.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
Dangerous work. I do my own dishes.
If there are no further questions, we'll return to the sorry, Mr. Arnold.
So I have to get one question in per section. I think that's my KPI. I had one question and relates a process question. It's on page 74, the event severity rating actual. For each incident, is a potential consequence captured at the point of incident as well as the actual?
Sorry, can you just repeat your question?
For an incident, is the potential consequence captured as well as the actual? I guess an actual consequence might be sand in the eye, an irritant, but if it related to a potential consequence, but it was a near miss, it may be a more significant one. So
Yeah.
just wondering if both are sort of captured, and if so, maybe having that potential as another sort of category on page 74 might be useful.
That's a good question. I don't believe it captures potential, but I think as part of the near miss reporting, when officers then go through and do the investigation as to what caused the near miss, it's more focused around what caused the issue rather than the potential.
Thank you. I guess through the chair, I think incorporating as part of the investigation process is sort of quite key, and I think having the sort of potential both captured in terms of the potential consequences, which could be a fatality based, is sort of useful to put in context as the vast majority of incidents. The actual consequence is very small, if nothing, but sometimes those are sort of key ones that we've.
Okay. Well, we can certainly have a look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. Noting the officer's recommendation, do I have, thank you, Mayor, and seconded, thank you, Councillor Rouse. All those in favour? Nil against. Thank you for that report. Moving now to One Council project, we'll take the paper as read. Would management like to make any additional comments? If not, I'll open it for questions.
I'll provide a summary. Do you want me to do a summary?
Yes, I think we should, given the importance of the project.
Okay, through you, Madam Chair. So as the report has shown, and as we've discussed previously with the committee and the council, so phase 2 has taken a completely different approach as to how we've gone through implementation. So stage 1 was based around council, so officers having to do full configuration of the system, and there was a heavy reliance upon consultants and Tech 1 to do that configuration, and then user acceptance testing, and then through to upload. So with this approach, where we do a copy config, council staff go off and they go visit other councils. So we're working quite closely with the likes of South Perth and with Canning and a couple of others, Serpentine, Jarrahdale as well. So we go off, we review their systems, and on the basis that we try and implement as much as possible their config and then just do minor changes to it, that then saves a significant amount of time and cost in terms of doing configuration change, where the focus then is around user acceptance testing and then training staff in that system. So as you can see from our time and cost, we are slightly below budget at this point in time due to the effort that's been expended, and it has enabled us to bring on systems a lot quicker. So we're already starting to use service requests. There's been more work that's been done around asset management, and then we're starting to move on to the other stages, which will be the more complex one once we start to get into the planning and development licenses and permits. So once we start to get into those areas, that's when it becomes more complex. We've also starting to have conversations with a couple of other councils around shared services, particularly around business and analysts, but also helping other councils with their approach, because they're all struggling to get staff and resources to do their projects as well. So we're starting to have conversations around how we can share resource, which then also enables us to spread risk and cost.
Very good. I have one question from the chair. I note that the contingency is being created by the deferral of staff employment to staff. Are there any additional risks associated with those lower resources?
Through you, Madam Chair. No, those ones have been managed. We, for instance, we did have one staff member who was going to be seconded to the project on the basis that we would try and backfill their position, but we were unable to do that, so we brought the position back in. So we manage it based upon each role.
Thank you. Mayor?
I suppose that was similar to my question. I suppose, do we have the resources to actually share resources with other councils?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we do, and particularly there's a couple of areas where we've had staff working on the project that have now developed some quite good skills that we can then share. But it also enables us to share the consultants that we have been using and bringing into the project. So it enables us to maintain control of those and then share that resource.
Question, given that we've come in under budget, that, as I understand correctly, that underspend, does that just goes back into the project?
Through you, Madam Chair, hold that thought. That's not an underspend at this point. It's an underspend at this point in time.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that we will, at the end of the project, have an underspend. But at this stage, I would say, to look at it, we're tracking on budget.
I suppose the project's always been overspent.
Correct. And we are, the
Yes.
team have been given strict instructions to manage to budget.
Thank you.
If it did happen, it'd be a world first, wouldn't it? Really? Yes. Thank you, Councillor.
I noticed the next module progress is enforcement and infringements. Is that City Assist and Rangers?
Through the chair, the phase 2 is what they refer to as the compliance module. So it's the planning, health, building, as well as all the infringements and so on. So it would be, yes, the Ranger service.
Yeah, it's just, so would the Rangers be consulted how they'd want that system to operate?
As per what the CEO just indicated, we will be using a configuration that's borrowed, is it the right term? Borrowed from another council and then tweaked for our purpose. So to date, for example, with the service requests for animals wandering, animals attacks, etc., where the community can report those incidents. Officers were involved in the establishment of the categories, involved in actual workflows as to who would be alerted when those requests were submitted into the system and how we would be responding to. So we've always had, and through the whole process, had subject matter experts from each team involved, and then it's up to the subject matter expert together with the manager or coordinator of that team to train and develop the rest of the team around that. So there's always going to be, it's never going to be 100% when you first introduce something new. There's always going to be a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of an adjustment, and it'd be fair to say we had that in our service request rollout, but now the team is using it 100%.
All right, that was just one of those councils you mentioned firsthand that the system wasn't working for their Rangers, so that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Any further questions? Thank you.
Thanks, through the chair. Yeah, thanks very much for both the verbal update and the written update. I think they're in value. performance management approach is very useful. I think in terms of the actions to make sure it's you have this sort of oversight and the project management appears sort of strong, and obviously strong consideration in terms of resourcing. I think I'm just noting there's a ramp up in terms of the estimated sort of work delivered starts to occur from September up through to December, which are traditionally quite tough months in order to execute. So I suppose it's just an observation in terms of sort of baselining the work component. I suppose not necessarily the budget actual. Is that something which we still feel confident that we can obtain those levels of work right through the Christmas period, right through to December?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, so that is one of the things which is closely monitored, and it is to do with also staff availability, so that has been planned out, particularly to enable that to be able to get to, as Maria said, one of the key pieces of work, which is the compliance section.
Further to that, through the chair, that compliance module isn't due to start officially until next year, but the teams are already engaged with the consultants or the project team to start a lot of that work with the other councils, starting having workshops on the look and feel of each of the modules. They're not really modules, but the actual areas, application areas for planning, building, health. So there's already a level of familiarisation that's going on. So the actual work itself is more next year, but from now to December for phase 2, it's really about familiarisation and the configuration and whether there's going to be a level of tweaking that's I guess understanding what that level of tweaking will be in the configuration.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, we have an officer recommendation that the committee note the statistical data report. I have a mover for that. Thank you, Mayor. Seconded. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. All those in favour? Nil against. Motion's carried. Item 8.6, the Developer Contribution Plan's Quarterly Progress Report. Very thorough report. Are there any opening remarks from management, please?
Through you, Madam Chair, this is the standard quarterly report. I think this is the third report that we've presented to the committee to give the committee an oversight of funds coming in and funds going out with respect to the management of development contribution funds. You will see from the highlights of this quarter that most of the activity in terms of DCA payments are associated with the subdivision activity that's occurring in the Apsley estate, in the Mandogalup precinct, and in the Ankertel North area. So on both sides of the freeway, we're having quite a bit of activity around development. We also starting to see a bit more activity in our established areas, so in the Kwinana Centre, town centre or traditional town centre, Cassia Glades, with some of those infill sites are also starting to move. So you can start to get a sense from this report where those hotspots are and also where our spend is. And in the last quarter, most of it was really around finalising some of the infrastructure that's already in place for the new Maya facility, just finalisation of that facility, a little bit of works around some of the main drains, and then, as you know, the ongoing process associated with the acquisition of the land at the Honeywood Oval precinct. So nothing majorly new, but I guess it gives you a sense of where the activity is taking place.
Thank you. Any questions? Mayor?
Through the chair, essentially we've been through a process of compulsory acquisition. So that process hasn't really cost the city much in terms of any legal advice or any of that sort of process. So that's been completed, and the actual land is now the city's land. The issue is the question of compensation. So we are legally required to compensate the landowner for that land. It's only fair and reasonable. The issue that we have is they obviously are valuing at a rate that is commensurate with a residential development rate as opposed to a public open space rate. We're now at that juxtaposition where we're just working through that and determining through a new valuation, so the discrepancy around the valuation, around what is a fair and reasonable valuation, because our last valuation was from some time ago. So we want to get one up to date, which we should have shortly, and then be able to put that on the table and make an offer that is hard to refuse. So I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add.
If the the acquisition has occurred, what's the hold up in actually fixing that land to a standard of the open space?
Through the chair, we are already in that process. So the engineers and landscape architects are working with our community facilities officers to determine the design of that triangle and its incorporation into the active space or any other needs that we might have with respect to that portion of the land. So that's already happening. We're already collecting money for that through the DCA. So it's just really when we're ready to proceed with, I mean, it'd be nice to finalise the compensation so that that's all out of the way before we actually do any works on the land itself.
Through the chair, just a question. Is this report included as part of other committees that review this report, or is their sole purpose for producing the report the Audit and Risk Committee?
Through the chair, it is for the purposes of the Audit and Risk Committee as part of an outcome from a previous audit of DCPs, but it is vetted through the DCP cross-functional team, which is a internal committee that's been established because of the risk of DCP management being so significant, of which the full executive sits on that committee at this point in time, together with the engineering planning managers and facility manager and relevant officers, so as well as our manager governance. So it's quite an extensive group that meets monthly and vets this report together with a number of other DCP reports.
I guess through the chair, I suppose the reason is quite a narrow sort of focus with a lot of granular detail, and I saw the reference in terms of the internal audit report previously. I guess in terms of my thinking was if this was a specific report that took considerable time in terms of collating, whether or not that's sort of something that that this Audit Risk Committee gets quite good benefit out of, or whether or not I suppose there's more efficient ways in terms of sort of compiling this. And appreciate the audit action referred to management report and oversight, but I suppose it doesn't explicitly cover Audit and Risk Committee. So see it come on the agenda sort of all the time with the level of sort of detail and there's sort of questions on. So I guess through the chair, it's just a sort of question around, does that I suppose still sort of worthwhile to sort of include, or and particularly if it's something which is quite cumbersome, it's just I suppose a self-reflection in terms of the process and the agenda item.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think in response to that, it would be a matter of time. I think once there's confidence that the processes have been put in place, as Maria said, there's a cross-functional team that's meeting monthly and reviewing it, and that we've got a lot of confidence that processes are in place to review that, we've got good internal reporting. we could then make a recommendation that this is then ceased and then it's just included possibly as part of an annual report. There are other DCP reports that do go to council, but they cover off a different function of the DCP.
So perhaps in the spirit of the suggestion, at the next meeting, it would be useful for us to understand your level of confidence with respect to this process and the sort of framework of reporting and managing the DCA payments, and a recommendation as to the appropriate level of reporting going forward, whether it be on each meeting, every second meeting or annual basis. I think there is a lot of detail in this. I found it interesting to read, but I saw it more as an operational management report. And one that we're interested in, that the process is working.
Right, we'll take a note of that.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, we're being asked that we note and provide comments, which have been done with respect to the report on the developer contribution activity. I'm happy to move that from the chair. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Mayor. All those in favour? Nil against. The motion's carried. I understand there are no late or urgent items of business, and there were no questions which were to be taken on notice. If not, in closing the meeting, could I please extend the committee's personal thanks to the Mayor for her substantial guidance and contribution to this committee over many years, and on a personal note, since I've been involved with the committee and taking on the chair, and I wish the Mayor every success in her future endeavours. So thank you very, very much, Mayor. Now I'd like to declare the meeting closed. Thank you.